to introduce to you tonight's speaker, Heather Strickland.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I have to find my clicker here. Right. Thank you all very much for having me. I know that this is a topic that some people think doesn't apply to them at this point in time of their lives. And it may have applied to you at previous times in your life, or you may have members of your family that are looking at building their family and considering their options. So what I wanted to do today was just give you a history of two forms of family formation. One is assisted reproductive technology, and the other is adoptions, kind of focusing mostly on private adoptions. So I welcome questions throughout the presentation. Please do feel free, wave your hands really big so that I can see you, because I'm happy to answer any questions as we go. So first of all, what is assisted reproductive technology? And there's sort of the layman's definition, and then there's the definition that was defined by the Centers for Disease Control. So in general, people view ART as any kind of intervention to assist in achieving a pregnancy. So that can be using medication, that can be artificial insemination, can also be the in vitro fertilization. That's where an egg and a sperm are joined outside of the uterus and then implanted. And then also surrogacy, which can either be one where there's a woman who's carrying a child that she is genetically related to, or it can be where a gestational carrier situation where she has no genetic connection to the child she's carrying. But the Centers for Disease Control started keeping statistics on this around 1992, and they kept their definition incredibly narrow. So there's a huge portion of assisted reproductive technology that we actually don't have a methodology for maintaining statistics. So the CDC definition really focuses on treatments where both the egg and the embryo are handled. So that does not include sperm insemination. It doesn't include women taking medication just to assist with a pregnancy. So it's a really narrow definition. And so when I talk about some of the statistics, I just want you to be aware that it's a very small fraction of what is available out there in terms of technology. So assisted reproductive technology actually has a longer history than I think people realize. It started in 1790 when a Scottish surgeon reported the first successful human vaginal insemination. I'm sorry, you're eating dinner. These words are going to come out. And then in 1884, the United States had the first case of human donor insemination in Pennsylvania. And this was a situation where a professor in a medical school had his anesthetized female patient sitting in the middle of the room. He picked the best-looking male student he could find, took the donation, and inseminated the woman in front of the class without her consent. Her husband consented, but she did not. So, and then in 1954, we had our first successful pregnancy using frozen sperm, which is a major development in being able to preserve somebody's fertility. But I think it's also important to recognize that while we could have frozen sperm leading to successful pregnancies, frozen eggs didn't lead to successful pregnancies until 1997. So the first test tube baby was in 1978, and that was in London. The first test tube baby in the United States was in 1981, and in 1984 was the first time that there was a live birth from frozen embryos. So these are major leaps forward in the medical technology. And as I had stated before, in 1982, that's when the Centers for Disease Control actually started keeping some statistics about what was happening in clinics, and so they could keep track of what the numbers were. And 2014 saw a huge development, especially as it relates to women and their reproductive freedom. And that is that the technology for freezing one's eggs really improved and really became mainstream. You may have recalled that there were announcements from Google and Apple that they were actually going to provide egg freezing as a benefit to their employees, which sparked a great debate about, is this really improving situations for women? Is this really giving them more options for when they can have their family? Or is it encouraging them to delay having a family, maybe in a way that we don't really want to be doing? It also led to an explosion of some really interesting parties out there called egg freezing parties. You can actually get online and Google these. They're still taking place. You can be a hostess of one and have all your friends come over and have wine and dinners. Oh, wait, are we at one? Hey, wait a minute. And there'll be a presentation where somebody talks about, the benefits of freezing your eggs, and hey, you can have your 22-year-old eggs preserved, and then if you decide to have a baby at 50, you can still do so. So there's obviously a lot of controversy about this kind of approach, but it definitely does improve women's options, especially if they're facing some kind of a medical procedure that's guaranteed to reduce their ability to have a child. So that's certainly a huge benefit. The other benefit that came from egg freezing becoming so much more successful is that we were no longer freezing embryos. So if a woman in the past wanted to preserve her fertility, she had to have embryos created. She couldn't just freeze her eggs. That meant she had to have either a donor or a partner who was willing to go in on this with her. And then it raised all kinds of issues about who was going to control those embryos or use them in the future, especially when they broke up. And I can assure you, People magazine's very enlightening about that. So here we have just an article about this is the woman who was the first test tube baby in 1978, and this is her becoming a mom. So what does infertility look like today? All of these stats are from the CDC. And their statistic is that between 2011 and 2015, 7.3 million women used infertility services. That's a lot of people seeking infertility services. 6.7% of married women were infertile. That's actually a diagnosis. And 12.1% of women had impaired, somebody with a medical background pronounce that for me. Thank you. And that's the ability to conceive a pregnancy and also maintain a pregnancy. So these women may have had eggs that are perfectly fine. It's just that they weren't able to conceive and carry a pregnancy. And so in general, the problems are divided between 1/3 of infertility is attributed to the female partner, 1/3 is contributed to the male partner, and 1/3 is a combination of problems are just completely unidentified. So, People magazine. Surrogacy nightmare. Unfortunately, surrogacy makes the headlines when it's a nightmare. You don't ever see contracts worked really well. Surrogacy went great, families very happy, because that does not lead to really wonderful headlines about whose babies are these. So you may have seen this. This was last year. This woman agreed to be a gestational carrier for a gentleman. She has no genetic connection to the babies that she's carrying. It was his sperm and donor eggs. And she was pregnant with triplets. And she decided she wanted to keep her babies. And so she fought for the right to do that. She's living in California. California has a really rigid and robust framework for gestational carriers. And so she was not successful in her bid to keep these children that she had no genetic connection to. But it made a really great People article. So how common is assisted reproductive technology? So in 2014, the Centers for Disease Control reported that there were 208,604 ARTS cycles performed at 458 clinics around the country. Now, if you recall, this is that narrow definition of assisted reproduction. This is just where an egg or an embryo are handled. It does not include women who sought medication or in uterine insemination. So that resulted in 57,303 live births, but that's not children because there were multiple children, and so that resulted in 70,350 live-born infants. That's 2014, and that's the latest data that's available, so you can imagine those numbers have definitely increased. So Arizona has over 20 fertility clinics. So I know that's kind of surprising to some people. So this kind of medical treatment is alive and well and happening in our state. And then also, how has egg donation increased? You can see the numbers from 122 births from donated eggs in 1990 to almost 20,000 in 2012. So these numbers are really going up, and they're going to continue to go up, and there's a couple of reasons for that. For one thing, insurance covers a significant, more insurance programs are covering the cost of this, so it's not as cost prohibitive for people. Issues of infertility are sort of coming out of the shadows. It's something that people are feeling less shameful about and are talking about more. There's more support for them. And so people are looking to other family formation options. So why do you need the law involved, or when do you need the law involved? Anytime you have donor gametes, that's donor sperm or donor eggs, or both, or you're using donated embryos to achieve a pregnancy, you need to have a legal contract somewhere along the line. Whether that's from the donor donating to the clinic or a donor donating to a friend, you need to have some kind of a legal contract in place. If a gestational carrier is going to be involved, and again, that's a woman who's carrying a pregnancy, she has no genetic relationship to the child at all, you have to have a contract because issues need to be arranged ahead of time. Everything from compensation to what's her insurance going to look like, who's going to cover that, what if she loses her insurance during the pregnancy, who's going to pick up the tab for that. And then they also have to tackle tough issues like, what if there is an issue and she's being asked to abort the child because of any number of reasons, or perhaps even selective reduction. So these contracts are really important, and they're really important for setting expectations, making sure everybody's really clear on what they're about to do. And contracts are also needed in a place that I think a lot of people forget, and that is when individuals or couples preserve their sperm, eggs, or embryos. So Sally, I'm going to look to you because estate planning, when you have banked your sperm, egg, or embryos, is enormously important, and yet it is tremendously overlooked. And a lot of people who are preserving their eggs or embryos, they might be young, they might not be in a relationship, they may not be thinking about what's going to happen to these sperm and eggs if I pass away. And I talk to them about, do you really want your mom creating your genetic child after you pass away? So, and I assure you a lot of them don't even think about those questions. So the picture again, Gotta Love People magazine. So this is Sofia, Varga, and Nick Loeb, I think is his name. They created embryos together. They did not have a contract. And so then they fought over who was going to get to control those embryos because, of course, they broke up. So he was saying, or she was saying, I have a fundamental right to procreate, and you're preventing me from doing that. And he's saying, I have a fundamental right not to procreate, and you are trying to make me a parent when I don't want to be. So he ultimately won. And so we've kind of seen a trend in the law that tends to favor the right not to procreate. But where we see that start to sort of shift is when it is a person's last opportunity to create a family. So if a woman used her last embryos, her last eggs before, say, a cancer treatment, created these embryos, and it is her only opportunity to have a genetic child, the courts do sometimes tend to shift and let her have control and use of it. So that's why the egg banking and the ability to preserve your eggs without having been fertilized previously is really helpful. Do I have any questions? Comments? Oohs and ahs? Yes.
Maria,
Hi.
So what were the advances in the cryogenic or freezing of the eggs technology in 2014? I like that from my own side.
Then you're talking to the wrong woman. Um, I don't have doctor in front of my name, I'm sorry. But I really don't know the science behind it, but my understanding is that 2014 is when they first actually saw eggs that were frozen being successfully thawed and then fertilized and actually achieving a pregnancy. So, yeah. And of course, medical technology is changing at a rate that's just unbelievable. And unfortunately, our laws do not keep up. So, all right, yes.
And what does this mean for low-income women? Is this even an issue for them or people who don't have insurance?
No, it's not. It's something that's just unreachable for them. And that is one of the issues when we're looking at assisted reproductive technology, is that it is something that is for those who can afford it. Now, there are a couple of things that are changing. For example, there's a couple of bills that are out there to make assisted reproductive technology available to veterans, especially those who have sustained injuries that prevent them from being able to procreate on their own. So that'll show definitely a change. And the price and the costs are coming down. As the technology is getting better, as there are more and more clinics, and they're competing for patients, the price is definitely coming down. And it's to the point now where some of these infertility treatments are actually about the same cost as an adoption. So a lot of families are pursuing those options before considering returning to adoption. Now, the cost of a gestational carrier situation where you hire a woman to carry a pregnancy for you, I'd put in the $80,000 to $100,000. She does not get all that, I assure you. Her compensation is probably between $25,000 and $35,000. You have lawyers, definitely a lot of contracts. You might have an agency that actually recruited her and vetted her. And then, of course, you also have the cost of a physician as well. So it does add up very, very quickly. So some of you may remember in 1986, the Baby M case. This is when assisted reproductive technology sort of came into the public eye, and legislators responded to this. Mary Beth Whitehead was a traditional surrogate. That meant it was her genetic child that she was carrying. But she had agreed to carry this child for this family, and she decided she couldn't go through with the arrangement and then actually fled the state with the child. So that involved multiple states, and the court voided the contract between them, but the husband was granted primary custody with the traditional surrogate having liberal visitation. But Mrs. Stern, who was the intended mother, had absolutely no rights to the child at all. So as a result of this case, and I mean, this was a big case. It was all over the news. It was very scandalous. Michigan, New Jersey, and New York banned surrogacy completely. Just said you can't do it. And Arizona followed suit in 1989 and did the exact same thing. So created a law that said in part, no person may enter into, induce, arrange, procure, or otherwise assist in the formation of a surrogate parentage contract. That law is still valid today. It's still on our books. So why am I standing up here? Trust me, I ask myself that question a lot. The reality is, it is happening. It's happening all the time. My phone is ringing off the hook. People want consults. They want to understand how they can do it. Arizona's is behind the times. We are harming families and children by not recognizing that this is how families are formed. And so I'm hoping that someday it will change. So what's our reality? Okay, so I checked Craigslist before I came. There were 6 ads for egg donors. One was you had to be a model, light hair, blue eyes, and it was a $25,000 compensation for your eggs. Does anybody fit that description here today? Because I've got a job for you. I would say most compensation for egg donors, though, is probably between $8,000 and $10,000. So 25 was definitely significant. There were 9 ads for gestational carriers. That's women to carry a pregnancy for somebody else. Again, not have any kind of genetic connection. That's Arizona. I mean, I can tell you that these agencies that are recruiting women to be gestational carriers are targeting here. They're coming here. They are looking for these women to do this. Yes?
Is there any investigation in whether the donors have medical histories that you wouldn't want your child to have?
Yes, absolutely. That's a huge part of agreeing to be a donor, an egg donor, is going through the vetting process and going through the medical screening to make sure that you are an appropriate donor. And also to have an independent consultation with a physician that's going to walk you through what are the consequences of this choice, what are the potential risks. So. And some of that's also about choosing to work with a reputable company as well, and that's hard to vet and hard to figure out. So, and then like I said, there's 20 fertility clinics in the state of Arizona. I think 2 years ago that number was 16. I mean, they're growing, they're increasing, they are taking place here in Arizona. So the reality is everyone's kind of ignoring that law that says they're not allowed to do this. They're circumventing it by going to states that have really robust legal structures for gestational carriers. California, Nevada, New Mexico. So really easy commutes for folks in Arizona. And sometimes all you need in order to be able to utilize those laws is to have your embryo transferred in that state. So just you pick a clinic in California and you can use California law. Pick a clinic in Nevada and you and your gestational carrier can use Nevada law. So, you know, I don't know that we're really protecting anybody at this point by saying people can't do this.
So I'm just curious, like, what's the penalty? Because, like, once they find out, it's like, it's too late.
Right.
Right? But
Right. There is no penalty at this point. And that's part of it, is what is the penalty? And what are they going to do, take your child away? I mean, right. So it's kind of ludicrous that we're so far behind in terms of our legal structures, and people are definitely getting creative about ways to get around it. And I'll talk in a second about how we're getting around it too.
So are there national regulations for a minimal age for a surrogate or an egg donor?
There's no national standards, anywhere, regulations, I should say. It's not federal law. Every state has the ability to issue the laws that relate to this kind of family formation. Right. Right. Other states have set standards.
In the past, we have seen multiple births. Do we still, has it procedures changed that you have less than 4, 5, or 6 children? Has the procedure changed?
Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
one of the biggest changes that has occurred medically. You probably all remember Octomom. That was the woman who was carrying 8 children, excuse me. At the time, they had no idea whether or not any of these embryos would take. And so it was the standard of care at the time to just implant as many embryos as they could. And in her case, they all did end up in a pregnancy. That has changed dramatically. It's now actually considered the standard of care to not transfer more than 2 embryos at a time. Some clinics won't even do more than 1. There's been a lot of research and a lot of data that shows that a singleton pregnancy is just so much healthier than a multiple of any kind. So the medical community actually sees it as a success that they're reducing the number of multiples and having singletons. Of course, anytime you implant an embryo, it could also split and you end up with twins. So, and if you implant 2 embryos, 1 can split and there you have your triplets. So, yeah. So one of the other ways that we're kind of working around this is Arizona does have a robust legal structure about the establishment of maternity and paternity. But it's really based on genetics. And that's because it was created in the 70s. Obviously, it's changed a bit, but that's where its foundation is from the 70s. And none of this was really happening in the early 70s when those laws were created. So the workaround that we've been able to do is, as long as one parent has a genetic connection, then sometimes we're doing a step-parent adoption to allow the other parent to be considered a legal parent. Sometimes they are able to just enter into an agreement and the court signs a court order that says that they're the parents. Our biggest challenge is when you have intended parents that have absolutely no genetic connection to their child. And that's where we get the most interesting, have to get the most creative. So, and I'm seeing that a lot. There's sort of been a rise in interest in embryo adoption. I don't call it adoption, it's embryo donation. We do have a problem in this country in that we have over 600,000 embryos on ice, and nobody really knows what we're going to be doing with all of them. So there's really been an increase in interest in being able to donate those embryos to a couple that can't have children. And some agencies are creating, they're taking the best of adoption agencies' practices and creating an embryo adoption program under those kinds of, using those kinds of techniques and